Chosen one, before you go any further, give yourself permission to become still. I know your day is full, and I know there are responsibilities waiting for you the moment this message ends. There are decisions still asking for your attention, conversations you have not finished, and burdens that have quietly followed you from one day into the next. Yet for just a little while, let everything else rest. Some moments carry a different kind of weight, and perhaps this is one of them. Not because this moment demands more from you, but because it may finally give your soul the space it has been longing for. You did not pause here because your life suddenly became less demanding. You paused because something within you recognized that your heart needed more than another opinion or another distraction. Deep inside, there has always been a longing for the voice that brings peace instead of confusion, direction instead of endless questions. If you have been carrying silent prayers that no one else knows about, stay here a little longer. Some prayers never make it into spoken words. They exist only as quiet sighs, weary tears, or moments when your heart simply whispers, "Lord, I need you." God has always understood those prayers long before they found language. What matters most is not simply turning away from the noise around you. It is what begins to happen inside you when your soul finally has room to breathe. There are moments when the heart grows quiet enough to notice what constant activity has been covering. And in that quiet, something gentle begins to awaken. Sometimes the first gift God offers is not an explanation but His presence. And that presence changes the way you hear everything else. Before answers begin to make sense, His peace often arrives first, gently reminding you that His nearness has always been greater than your uncertainty. Many people have learned how to create moments of silence, yet they still wonder why God's voice can feel distant during certain seasons. If that has been your experience, it does not mean your prayers have gone unheard or that your faith has been overlooked. There are seasons when the waiting itself is shaping you, when unseen work is happening beneath the surface like roots, growing deeper before new life appears above the ground. Growth beneath the surface rarely draws attention. Yet, it is often the part of the journey that determines how much fruit your life will eventually carry. This message is for that place within you that has quietly been asking why the waiting has lasted so long, and whether anything meaningful has been happening while everything appeared still. Before we go any further, I want to invite you to consider 5 signs that may help you recognize what this season has truly been about. These are not meant to persuade you through fear or urgency, but to help you notice what may already be unfolding in your own heart. Sometimes we overlook the quiet ways God leads because we are expecting something dramatic. If these signs feel familiar, don't rush past them. Sit with them honestly, because sometimes truth settles gently before it transforms us deeply, and recognition often comes before understanding. The first sign is surprisingly simple. Before you knew what this message would say, something in you chose to stop. It may have looked like an ordinary moment on the outside, but inside there was a quiet pull that felt different from passing curiosity. The chosen one often recognizes an invitation long before understanding its meaning, because the heart sometimes responds before the mind can explain why. Long before your thoughts begin connecting the pieces, your spirit may already be responding to a gentle invitation that cannot yet be fully explained. Perhaps it felt like a gentle nudge that was impossible to ignore. Or maybe you have no words for it at all. You simply knew you needed to stay. That kind of inner movement deserves your attention, because not every pause carries the same weight. There are moments when your soul recognizes something important before your thoughts ever catch up. Those moments rarely announce themselves with certainty. They often arrive quietly, asking only for your willingness to remain present instead of moving on too quickly. The second sign is found in the pattern of this season. Maybe the same scripture keeps appearing, the same truth returns through different conversations, or a quiet reminder keeps meeting you in unexpected places. Perhaps someone says something that echoes a prayer you've never shared, or a verse you almost overlooked suddenly speaks directly into your circumstances. The chosen one does not walk through every season in the same way. There are hidden seasons when growth happens silently, and there are seasons when the same invitation keeps returning because your heart is drawing closer to receiving what has been prepared. If you have noticed these quiet confirmations gathering around you, receive them with gratitude rather than dismissing them as coincidence. They do not erase every question, yet they gently remind you that your journey has meaning. Sometimes God speaks through a single moment, and sometimes He patiently echoes the same truth until your heart is ready to embrace it. His patience is never a sign of delay. It is an expression of His kindness, allowing truth to take root instead of merely passing through your thoughts. The third sign may be the one that has been hardest to describe. You have carried the feeling that something is close, almost close enough to touch, yet it never seems to fully arrive. Perhaps you have prayed through long nights, remained faithful when no answers appeared, and wondered if you were somehow missing what you had been seeking. Maybe there were mornings when hope returned, only to fade again by evening, leaving you wondering whether you had imagined it in the first place. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. Many faithful hearts have stood in that same quiet place between promise and fulfillment. That deep sense of expectancy does not automatically mean God has stepped back from you. It may simply reveal the tension of a season where your heart is being prepared to receive more deeply than before. There are times when the promise seems to stand just beyond your reach, not because it has been withheld, but because something within you is still being gently made ready to carry its full weight. Just as a tree strengthens its roots before it reaches toward the sky, God often strengthens the inner life before revealing what has been quietly growing beneath the surface. Remember this. Chosen one, God's faithfulness has never depended on the volume of your emotions or the certainty of your understanding. His presence has remained steady, even through the quiet places where you questioned yourself, even through the nights when you wondered whether you had heard Him correctly. He has seen every moment when you chose to trust without clear answers, every prayer that seemed to disappear into silence, and every act of obedience that no one else noticed. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins in those hidden places, where hope keeps breeding, even before clarity finally arrives. Those unseen moments often become the foundation of a faith that circumstances can no longer shape. Ask. So if you recognize this longing within your own story, don't rush away from it. Let it become an invitation instead of a disappointment. There are seasons when what feels unfinished is actually preparing your heart for something it could not have fully held before. And sometimes the deepest work of God begins long before you can see its fruit. One day you may look back and realize that what felt like delay was quietly becoming preparation, and what seemed like silence was gently teaching your heart to recognize a faithfulness that had never left your side. Until then, remain present. Stay open. The one who began this work within you has never stopped carrying it forward, even through the seasons when you could only see one step at a time. The fourth sign that God is speaking to you in this season, chosen one, often appears in the quietest moments. Not every time you become still will you experience it, because silence alone is not the destination. Yet there are moments when the room grows quiet, your heart settles, and something begins to rise within you that carries a peace, a clarity, and a weight unlike anything your own thoughts could have created. It is difficult to explain with ordinary words, because it feels less like discovering an idea and more like receiving something that has been gently placed into your spirit. If you have experienced even a glimpse of that, you already know what I mean. It may have come during prayer, while reading scripture, or in a moment when you simply stopped trying to force an answer. Suddenly there was a quiet certainty that asked nothing from you except trust. Those moments are precious because they remind you that God's presence often reaches the heart before the mind fully understands what is happening. The chosen one learns that these moments cannot be manufactured, yet they are never meaningless. They become gentle reminders that your heart is already beginning to recognize the voice it has been longing to hear. Perhaps the clarity does not remain every day, and perhaps the peace seems to come and go. But even those brief moments reveal that something deeper is taking place within you. They are signs that your heart is becoming more receptive, even while the journey continues. The fifth sign is even more personal. As you have listened, there may have been something inside you quietly whispering, "I already knew this somehow," not because someone taught it to you before, but because your spirit had been carrying a question for a long time, waiting for language that could finally describe what you had been feeling all along. Maybe you have faithfully made room for God through prayer, through stillness, through seasons when no one else understood why you kept believing. Yet even with that faithfulness, you still sensed there was a distance between what you believed God was saying and what your heart could fully receive. If that has been your experience, you are not alone. Many faithful people have carried that same quiet ache without knowing how to describe it. Deep within, you may have already sensed that God was never the one pulling away. His voice was never absent. His faithfulness never weakened. The unanswered question has always been why his peace sometimes feels so close, yet so difficult to fully embrace. That is why this moment matters. Sometimes healing begins when we finally find words for what our hearts have been carrying in silence. The reason you paused for this message may not simply be because you were searching for another explanation. It may be because something within you recognized that it was finally time for a hidden struggle to be brought into the light. So here is what these 5 signs have been quietly leading toward. If they reflect your own journey, receive them with humility and hope. They do not make you better than anyone else, but they may help you recognize that God has been faithfully working in your life, even through seasons that felt painfully quiet. The chosen one is often shaped long before the purpose becomes visible. The question beneath everything we have explored is simple yet deeply personal. Why does God's truth sometimes feel so much greater than what we are actually able to carry into our daily lives? Why do we experience moments of profound peace, only to feel them fade beneath the weight of ordinary living? The answer begins closer than many people expect. The greatest obstacle is often not the noise surrounding you, but the unrest that quietly settles within you. A busy schedule can certainly distract your attention, but there are deeper layers of fear, disappointment, exhaustion, and unanswered questions that continue echoing long after the room has become silent. Creating space to be alone with God is a beautiful and necessary practice. Learning to slow down, stepping away from endless distractions, and making room for prayer all prepare the heart in meaningful ways. These disciplines matter because they teach us to become available, and availability has always been part of spiritual maturity. Yet perhaps you have faithfully practiced those habits for years and still found yourself wondering why God's presence sometimes seemed just beyond your reach. You created the quiet. You stayed faithful through the waiting. You kept returning even when emotions faded. Still, there remained a gap between what your soul longed to receive and what it seemed able to hold. That realization is not a reason for shame. It is an invitation to compassion. Sometimes the deepest noise is not outside your window, but inside your heart. Wounds that were never healed, fears that were never surrendered, disappointments that were never spoken aloud, and burdens carried for far too long can quietly shape the way we receive even the gentlest whisper from God. When the heart carries that hidden weight, His voice has not become weaker, His love has not become more distant. Instead, the heart is slowly learning how to receive what has always been offered with open hands, instead of clenched ones. The clear signal is not about making God speak louder. It is about allowing your inner life to become peaceful enough to recognize the voice that has been faithfully present all along. The scriptures give us a beautiful picture of this through the story of Samuel. During a season when people believed the word of the Lord had become rare, the deeper issue was never God's silence. The greater struggle was that hearts had not yet learned to recognize His voice when He spoke. God was still calling, but the human heart was still learning how to answer. That truth still speaks today. Chosen one. Sometimes what feels like silence is actually an invitation to grow in recognition rather than striving. God has not forgotten your name, and He has not stepped away from your waiting season. His voice has remained faithful, patiently meeting you again and again until the day your heart is ready to receive what He has been lovingly speaking all along. Into that quiet night while Samuel rested near the ark of the Lord, God's voice came gently and called his name. Without hesitation, Samuel ran to Eli, believing the voice belonged to the one he knew. 3 different times he responded with the same willingness, and 3 different times he returned to lie down, still unaware that the one calling him had been God all along. There is something deeply human about that moment, because it reminds us that even sincere hearts sometimes misrecognize the very voice they have been longing to hear. The call was never absent. It was simply arriving in a way Samuel had not yet learned to recognize. There is something deeply comforting about that story. Chosen one, Samuel's confusion did not come from a lack of faith or a lack of desire to listen. He was already in a place of devotion. He was already near the presence of God, yet he was still learning how to recognize the voice that had been reaching for him. That truth should lift a burden from your shoulders, because it reminds you that uncertainty is not the opposite of faith. Sometimes it is simply part of the journey that teaches faith how to hear more clearly. Maybe that feels familiar to you. Perhaps there have been seasons when you questioned whether you were hearing God correctly, even though your heart sincerely wanted to follow him. You prayed, waited, searched the scriptures, and still wondered whether your own thoughts had become louder than his leading. If so, take courage, because Samuel's story reminds us that spiritual maturity is not measured by never feeling uncertain. Sometimes it grows through the quiet process of learning the sound of God's voice, one moment at a time, until what once felt unfamiliar slowly becomes unmistakably known. When Eli finally understood what was happening, his instruction was beautifully simple. He did not tell Samuel to strive harder or to become more spiritual overnight. He simply said that if the voice came again, Samuel should answer, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." That response was more than a sentence. It was a posture of surrender, an open heart choosing availability over anxiety. It shifted Samuel from trying to figure everything out to simply becoming present before God, and that quiet shift changed everything. There is a profound difference between trying to force yourself to hear and quietly making yourself available. One is driven by pressure, while the other is shaped by trust. God was never asking Samuel to become louder in his effort. He was inviting him to become more open in his heart. So many people carry the weight of believing they must somehow earn greater clarity, when often the invitation is simply to rest long enough for the heart to recognize the one who has been faithfully speaking all along. When the Lord called again, Samuel responded differently. The voice itself had not changed. God's desire to speak had never weakened. What changed was Samuel's readiness to receive what had been offered from the beginning, and in that moment, the message finally settled into a heart that was prepared to carry it. The breakthrough was not that heaven suddenly became louder. The breakthrough was that Samuel's heart had become ready to answer with trust instead of confusion. Perhaps your own journey has felt much like those first 3 calls. You prayed sincerely, remained faithful, and still walked away wondering if you had missed something. There may have been nights when you questioned yourself more than you questioned God, wondering whether your waiting meant you had somehow failed to understand him. Yet maybe nothing was wasted. Maybe those quiet moments were teaching your heart to recognize the one who had been gently calling your name all along, preparing you for a clarity that could only come through patient trust rather than hurried certainty. The same pattern appears in the life of Moses. Before the burning bush, there were long years spent in the wilderness, years that probably seemed ordinary to everyone watching from the outside. Day after day he tended sheep, lived far from the life he once imagined, and learned to trust God in places that offered little recognition and even less certainty. Nothing about those years appeared extraordinary, yet heaven was accomplishing something that no one else could see. Those years were not empty years. They became the hidden place where pride was softened, patience was formed, and dependence on God quietly grew. Every sunrise over the wilderness, every ordinary task, every silent evening became part of a deeper work taking place within him. Some of the deepest work God does happens where there is no audience, no applause, and no visible progress. Only the slow shaping of a faithful heart. What feels repetitive to us often becomes preparation in the hands of God. Then one ordinary day, Moses noticed something different. A bush burned without being consumed. He could have continued walking. He could have continued walking. He could have convinced himself that he was too busy or that someone else would stop to look. Instead, he chose to turn aside. It was a simple decision on the surface, yet it revealed something much deeper at heart that had not become too distracted to notice when God was inviting him into something sacred. That small decision changed everything. Before the calling, before the mission, before the revelation of God's name, there was simply a man willing to stop and pay attention. Sometimes the most life-changing encounters begin with nothing more dramatic than a heart that is willing to pause. The moments that alter our lives forever rarely announce themselves ahead of time. They often arrive quietly, asking only that we become present enough to notice them. Chosen one. Perhaps that is where you are today. Life has kept moving, responsibilities have continued to multiply, and your days have become filled with ordinary demands. Yet somewhere beneath all of it, there has been a quiet invitation, asking you to turn aside, not to escape your life, but to become fully present to the God who has been walking beside you through every part of it. He has seen every burden you carried without complaint, every prayer you whispered when no one else was listening, and every step you continued taking, even when the road ahead remained unclear. The wilderness was never proof that Moses had been forgotten. It became the place where he was prepared for what he could not yet see. There are seasons when God seems quiet, yet those seasons often shape us more deeply than the moments when every answer comes quickly. Waiting stretches our faith, but it also enlarges our capacity to carry what God is preparing to entrust to us. What feels hidden today may become the very foundation that allows you to carry tomorrow's calling with humility and faith. It is often in those quiet seasons that God does his most enduring work. He teaches patience where we expected speed. He builds trust where we wanted certainty. He forms character before revealing assignment, because what he desires to accomplish through your life requires a heart that has learned to remain close to him regardless of circumstances. The waiting is not standing in the way of your purpose. In many ways, it is becoming part of your purpose. Asterisk. The stories of Samuel and Moses reveal the same beautiful truth. God does not abandon his people while they wait. He patiently forms them, teaching them to recognize his presence before revealing what comes next. The heart that learns to pause, to surrender, and to remain available often discovers that God has been speaking far longer than it first realized. Chosen one, if this season has felt quieter than you expected, perhaps it is because heaven is accomplishing a deeper work than words alone could ever express. Stay near him. Keep your heart open. In time you may look back and realize that even the silence was carrying his faithful voice all along. Chosen one, there are moments when God's words seem to reach far deeper than simple understanding. Sometimes you read a familiar passage of scripture, hear a verse you've known for years, or sit quietly in prayer, and suddenly those same words carry a weight they never seemed to hold before. The message itself has not changed. What has changed is the openness of your heart to receive everything those words have been carrying all along. It is as though a window quietly opens inside you, allowing light to enter a room that has always been there but has remained dim until now. There is a difference between hearing something and truly receiving it. One touches the mind for a moment, while the other settles into the deepest places of the soul and begins changing the way you live, the way you love, and the way you see your journey. When God speaks, he is never offering information alone. He is inviting transformation, and transformation often happens more gently than we expect. It rarely arrives with dramatic announcements. More often, it comes through quiet moments that slowly reshape your heart, until one day you realize you are responding to life differently than you once did. Perhaps this explains something you have quietly wondered about. Maybe there were seasons when you knew the truth with your mind, yet your heart struggled to rest in it. You believed God's promises, but fear still lingered. You trusted his faithfulness, yet uncertainty continued to whisper in the quiet hours. That tension does not mean your faith is weak. It simply reveals that healing often unfolds one layer at a time, and every layer God restores creates room for a deeper experience of his peace. Think about the openness of a child. Children receive the world with wonder, with curiosity, and with hearts that have not yet learned to protect themselves from every disappointment. They are fully present in the moment, free to notice beauty that adults often hurry past. Somewhere along the journey of growing older, many hearts become weighed down by responsibilities, disappointments, unanswered prayers, and the constant pressure to keep moving. Without realizing it, we begin expecting burdens more easily than we expect grace. And that quiet shift changes the way we receive even the simplest gifts from God. Life has a way of filling every quiet space with another demand, another worry, another voice asking for your attention. Day after day, the soul can become tired without even realizing it. The noise is no longer only around you. It slowly becomes part of the way you carry yourself, until even moments of silence still feel crowded inside. You sit in a quiet room, yet your thoughts continue running. Your body may be still, but your heart is still carrying yesterday's worries and tomorrow's responsibilities. If this has been your experience, hear this with compassion, chosen one. Your weariness is not proof that God has moved farther away. Your questions are not evidence that he has stopped speaking. The longing you still carry for his presence is itself a beautiful reminder that your heart continues reaching toward him, even when the journey feels heavy. Hearts that have stopped caring rarely continue searching, but your desire to keep seeking him reveals that hope is still alive within you. Creating space for prayer, worship, and stillness remains deeply important. Those quiet moments invite your heart to slow down and remember who God is. Yet many faithful people know what it feels like to practice those rhythms consistently, while still wondering why the peace they experience seems to fade so quickly once ordinary life begins again. The contrast can feel discouraging, but it often reveals how deeply our souls long to carry his peace beyond isolated moments and into everyday living. Maybe you have asked yourself why clarity comes during prayer, but feels distant by the next morning. Maybe you have wondered why moments that seem so alive with God's presence become difficult to hold as daily responsibilities return. Those questions do not make you less faithful. They reveal the honest struggle of someone who sincerely desires to walk closely with the Lord. The very fact that you notice the difference means your heart has already tasted something real, and now it longs to remain there more consistently. The good news is that God has never measured your worth by how perfectly you receive every moment with him. He has remained patient through every season of uncertainty, every distracted prayer, every quiet disappointment, and every day you kept showing up even when you felt empty. His grace has always been larger than your limitations. He has never confused your moments of weakness with a lack of love for him. And his compassion has always reached further than your own understanding of yourself. Sometimes what your heart needs most is not more effort but deeper surrender. Not striving harder to experience God, but allowing yourself to rest in the truth that he has remained faithfully present through every season. The chosen one often discovers that spiritual growth is less about learning new things and more about becoming open enough to receive what God has been lovingly speaking all along. Surrender is not giving up, it is releasing the pressure to control every outcome and allowing your soul to trust the one who has never stopped holding your life together. Over time, that quiet openness begins changing everything. Familiar scriptures carry fresh life. Ordinary prayers become deeply personal. Seasons that once felt empty reveal hidden purpose. The transformation does not happen because God suddenly begins speaking louder. It happens because the heart slowly becomes more willing to recognize the voice that has been patiently calling it home from the very beginning. As your heart softens, you begin noticing his fingerprints in places that once seemed ordinary, and even the smallest moments become reminders that he has been walking beside you all along. Chosen one, perhaps you have experienced moments when a verse you had read 100 times suddenly reached a place inside you it had never touched before. The words themselves had not changed, yet something within you had become ready to receive them differently. Instead of remaining ideas on a page, they became personal, carrying comfort, direction, and hope into the very season you were walking through. It felt less like discovering something new and more like finally recognizing something your soul had quietly known for a long time. Many faithful people know this experience. There are seasons when Scripture feels familiar, and there are seasons when those same passages seem to come alive as though they were written for that exact moment in your life. God has always known where you would be when those words finally settled into your heart. And sometimes He allows understanding to unfold gently rather than all at once. His timing often teaches us as much as His answers do, because waiting shapes our hearts to receive what hurried understanding never could. Perhaps you have faithfully served others while quietly wondering why your own heart still felt weary. You continued encouraging people, praying for them, and carrying responsibilities that few ever noticed. Yet somewhere beneath all of that faithfulness, you longed for the same closeness with God that you so often pointed others toward. If that has been your story, know that God sees the hidden places no one else can see. He notices the prayers whispered after everyone else has gone home, the strength you offered when you felt weak yourself, and the quiet sacrifices that never receive recognition. There are seasons when serving becomes so constant that the soul forgets how to simply receive. You continue pouring out because love calls you to, yet your own heart quietly waits for the stillness where God ministers to you instead. That longing is not weakness. It is the invitation to return to the place where you are loved before you are useful. Before you ever accomplished anything for His kingdom, you already belong to His heart. Others have walked through long seasons of waiting, carrying promises they believed God had spoken, while wondering why fulfillment seemed just beyond reach. They remained faithful. They continued praying. They kept showing up, even on the days when hope felt fragile. Yet, deep inside there remained the quiet feeling that something beautiful was close, though it had not fully arrived. Those seasons often stretch our faith in ways that comfort never could, teaching us to trust God's character before we fully understand His timing. If you have lived in that kind of waiting, chosen one, do not mistake delay for abandonment. There are moments when peace comes before answers, and clarity grows slowly beneath the surface, like roots reaching deeper into the soil, before new life appears above the ground. What feels unfinished today may simply be continuing its hidden work. Some of the strongest trees spend years strengthening their roots before anyone notices how high they will eventually grow. Sometimes the greatest change is not that God begins speaking more clearly. Sometimes the change happens because your heart becomes quieter, softer, and more willing to receive what He has been faithfully speaking throughout the entire journey. His voice has never needed to become louder. It is His love that patiently teaches us how to recognize it more deeply. The transformation is subtle, but one day you realize peace has begun to replace panic, trust has begun to replace striving, and hope has quietly become your natural response. You paused your day to be here, and that decision itself says something about your heart. Beneath all the responsibilities, disappointments, and unanswered questions, there is still a part of you reaching toward God. There is still a quiet hope that refuses to disappear, even after seasons that have tested your endurance. That hope is not accidental. It is often sustained by God's faithfulness, long before we become fully aware of it ourselves. The life God desires for you has never belonged only to those who seem spiritually extraordinary. His invitation has always been for ordinary people with willing hearts. The chosen one is not defined by perfection, but by the quiet decision to keep returning, to keep trusting, and to keep making room for God's presence, even when every answer has not yet appeared. Faithfulness is often built through small, unseen choices repeated over time, and heaven never overlooks those quiet acts of obedience. Perhaps you have spent years learning to slow down, to pray, and to seek Him faithfully. Yet you still wondered why some moments felt so alive while others seemed distant. Those years were never wasted. Every prayer, every tear, every act of quiet obedience has been preparing your heart in ways you could not fully see. Even the seasons that felt uneventful have been forming a deeper trust that could not have grown in any other way. The work God is doing within you is often gentler than you expect. He is shaping your heart to carry peace without fear, hope without certainty, and faith without needing immediate proof. Transformation rarely arrives all at once. More often it unfolds through countless quiet moments when your soul slowly learns that His presence has been constant all along. The greatest miracles are not always the ones that change your circumstances overnight. Sometimes they are the ones that quietly change you while your circumstances remain the same. So if you have recognized yourself somewhere in these words, receive them with humility and hope. Let them remind you that the deepest work of God often happens beneath the surface, long before anyone can see the fruit. The waiting has not been empty, the silence has not been meaningless, and your story has never been outside His loving care. Every unseen season has been held in His hands, and every quiet step has been known by the one who has walked beside you from the beginning. Chosen one. God has remained faithful through every part of this season. Even when your heart struggled to hold the fullness of what He was doing, His voice never stopped reaching toward you. Stay present a little longer. Open your hands instead of tightening your grip, and allow what He has been patiently planting within you to finally settle where it was always meant to rest. You may not see the full picture today, but one day you will look back and realize that even the quietest moments were filled with His faithful presence, gently leading you exactly where you needed to be.